Ship it.
All right. Welcome, everybody, to the Redeemed Legion podcast. This is episode number 6. My name is Brendan. We have Pete on here, also from the Redeemed Legion, and we will probably have Drew coming on any minute. We are super excited today. We have our next guest on the podcast. Everybody, welcome Ken to the Redeemed Legion podcast.
Thanks for having me, guys.
What's up,
Absolutely.
Ken?
We are very excited to have Ken on the podcast today. We got in touch with Ken, or Ken got in touch with us, I should say, online, and we had some differing opinions on some things. And Ken reached out, and here we are. So we came on here to have a discussion about our differing worldviews and learn a little bit more about each other. So here we go. Ken, I will give you the floor.
Sure. So I think a lot of theists or just religious people in general, when they hear of an atheist, they think of someone who is making a declarative statement, there is no God. And that's not really the claim how it works. It's more, everyone that makes a claim of God to me, it's usually the definition of what they're giving of God is different in almost every case, in every person that I ask. So I kind of have to take it person by person. But I think a lot of times what happens is, and I brought my jar of gumballs here so we can show kind of an example of what happens with this and how it gets misunderstood. So if I said, Brendan, some guy just came over to me and he said, this jar has an even number of gumballs in it. Do you believe him?
I would say he's making a knowledge claim that he can't make.
Yes, exactly. So you're saying there's an odd number.
I would also say that is a different knowledge claim that he also can't make.
Yeah. And so can you kind of see the analogy I'm getting to here?
Yep.
Of where a lot of times when someone says, there is a God, and I say, I don't say I think you're wrong. I just say I've not seen convincing evidence of that myself. I'm open to seeing it. But a lot of times I think it comes down to people say, with the gumballs, is God real? And then we say, I don't think you've met your burden of proof. And a lot of times that gets flipped over to, so you don't think there's any God. And then that would be me making a declarative statement about it. And I would then have the burden of proof on myself saying, no, there's not a God. And that would also put me in the position of having to, disprove a negative, which is almost logically impossible to do. So yeah, I take each claim as it comes with God, and then I just have to break it down. What do you believe? Why do you believe that? And yeah,
sure.
So that's atheism. It's not there is no God. It's people are making claims about a God to me, and I'm just saying I don't think it's met its burden of proof yet, in my opinion.
Okay. Yeah, that's reasonable.
And I would even say, and just to find some common ground, because I have read through most of the Bible, and in my younger years, I would say this is just all trash. It's not even worth reading, whatever. Later, and I kind of credit Jordan Peterson for this one, kind of slapping me in the head with it and getting me to actually think about the stories a little bit more. And so I don't think of them necessarily as literal. I see the metaphors in the stories and pull the value from that. So I made a couple just examples of like Cain and Abel. That's a story about sacrifice. If you're not going to sacrifice much, and you're not willing to sacrifice much to get to your goal, getting to that goal is not going to be very tenable. David and Goliath. That's a story about determination. I think you guys would say faith as well. But I would just say it's a story of determination and courage and how that alone can get you through really difficult times. And then Noah, and the flood story, I think that's a metaphor for truth and the value of sticking to. If you think something's true and everyone else in the world thinks you're wrong, but you're still really, darn sure you're right, you should stick to your guns on that. And so I look at the stories more as metaphors and a mythological kind of statement, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it does. A couple things just off the rip based on what you said. Would you claim atheism, and you just talked about atheism and what that means. How do you would you be willing to accept a label of agnosticism versus atheism? Because I ask because it sounds to me like, and you said, right, you're not making the positive statement, there is no God, right? You're not making that assertion.
Because I don't even know what a God would be.
Sure. So yeah. And I get that. I guess what I'm getting at is, you are open to the idea of God, and you're looking for proof. Is that fair?
Yeah. If I saw evidence or proof of the supernatural aspects of it, yeah.
Cool.
And I would see no reason not to believe it. You'd be a silly person not to.
Sure. Agreed. So I think what you're going to hear from us tonight, the position that we're going to approach this from is one of from the truth of the Bible, right? From the position of God is real. He has revealed himself to us through his word, special revelation, and we'll talk about some things that we feel are proof to that.
Sure.
So right off the bat, when you were talking through some stories from the Bible, you referenced some things like truth and sacrifice and things like that. So we'll just take truth as one. What's your thoughts on truth versus lies? Do you feel that there can be, or there is objective truth?
Mostly mathematical law would be about as close as objective truth as I say you would get.
Okay.
Beyond that, proving anything 100% is very difficult. Almost, I would say impossible.
Okay. So mathematical proof is a good one. That's a perfectly legitimate claim. And I would say things like mathematics and the laws of logic, things that we all hold to as truths, right? They're what we use to do science, right? They're what we use to do experimentation and prove or disprove hypotheses and things like that. Mm-hmm. And my question to you would be, things like mathematics and the laws of logic, like the law of non-contradiction and the law of identity and things like that. Would you call those things universal? Meaning, when an experiment is done in Iceland, does that experiment and the methodology they used to conduct that experiment, does all that hold true for us here in the US or anywhere else in the world?
Yeah, I would say so. I'd have to see the specifics of like the exact experiment that they're doing, but if they're
Sure.
mixing two chemicals and measuring how much of an endothermic or exothermic reaction has happened, yeah, sure.
Okay. Yeah. And that, of course, there can be variables that could be skewed or wrong or whatever. But in order to conduct any scientific experiment, we all hold to laws of logic, right? That say that, like the law that says that I can't be here and not here at the same time. Yeah. Right. Simple laws of logic. So would you say that those laws of logic are material or immaterial?
I think the argument could be made both ways.
Okay. Well, you can't hold a law in your hand. You can't see a law. You can see physical representation of it.
Correct.
But you can't see the law. The law is a thing that is immaterial and universal and unchanging, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Sure.
As far as math, something is concerned.
Sure, because if they weren't, then science would be junk, right? We wouldn't get anything useful out of science if the laws didn't hold across people and space and time.
Yes.
Yep.
But
Okay.
I would add to that, science also has to always be open to criticism and correction, or
Sure.
it can't, or it gets stuck.
Sure.
Go. So
Yeah.
that's an important aspect of it too, that I would just, as a side to it.
Yeah, totally agree. And with that, I would say that the things that you just mentioned, as far as experimentation and being open to revision, things like that, those are secondary to the laws of logic, which state that we have to be, there's an aspect of truth to the laws of logic, right? We assume that the scientists performing the experiment are being truthful, right? If they're lying, then the experiment is junk.
Correct. Yeah.
So what I'm getting at, this is, I know I'm talking a lot and this has been a long way to go, but the point I'm getting at is, we agree that there are immaterial universal things like mathematics and the laws of logic.
Sure.
So from the atheistic worldview, really doesn't provide a justification for universal immaterial things. Where do those things come from if the universe is just matter in motion? It's just stardust bumping into stardust.
And I would say atheism doesn't answer that question, because atheism is only in regards to one claim, and that is, does God exist? So if we're getting into the rest of it, now we're kind of talking more about physics more than the other, I feel like.
Well, and physics is another example, right? In order for someone from the atheistic worldview, for someone that states that the universe was born in chaos and now we're here, for someone like that espouses that to.
But again, atheism wouldn't say anything about the origin of the universe. It's only about the claim of a God. So
True.
An atheist could believe the universe is 2 billion years old or 20 billion years old. It's only about the claim of God. It doesn't inform any of my worldview in any other way.
Okay. I guess I made an assumption. I would, in my experience, the majority of people who claim an atheistic worldview, in that they are denying that there is an all-powerful God, they generally hold to the principles of cosmic evolution and macroevolution and chemical evolution and things like those. So, sure. So what I'm getting at is, if that's the case, if the case is that the universe just happened, right? It happened over a long time by random, time and chance acting on matter. There is no justification in that worldview for universal, immaterial, unchanging things like laws of logic and mathematics. And I would argue, go ahead.
Why does there need to be a justification for it instead of them just existing naturally?
Because if you're a naturalist and a materialist, there can be no immaterial. What would give rise to the immaterial? And let me give you the other side of it, Ken.
Ideas, dreams, those are immaterial things. Yeah.
Totally agree.
Yeah, and they can be physical because they're reactions in our brain as well.
Right. And so from the other side of things, from our side of things, we hold to there is a personal creator of the universe. There is a mind behind the universe, and that's the triune God of Scripture. And in that, we have a justification as Christians for all these immaterial things. And we can say that immutable, inescapable things like the laws of logic they are here, they exist because the creator God gave them to us. He put them here. And otherwise, if we just talk about chemicals fizzing in our brains, that doesn't really give rise to universal immaterial things.
I think that there's an assumption being made in there, in that, so you're looking for a justification, and you're basically saying it's impossible without this God.
Correct.
Otherwise, we can't justify any of it. So I would basically ask how you didn't rule out every other god, a flying teapot that magically creates universe. How did we rule all that out?
Mm-hmm.
And what evidence do we have to say that the justification is this God? Because I think that's the real question.
Sure. And that is a valid question. I would point you to the special revelation of God in the Word of God, and the historicity and the transmissibility of the Word, and prophecy fulfilled, all of those things.
So prophecy. Give me, what do you think is like the single best prophecy that's come?
Jesus.
And predicted.
Jesus
existing.
The whole. Go ahead, Pete.
I'm just gonna say there's a handful of notes that specifically speak to Jesus coming. I don't have a list of sources, but I have a list of a couple of random bits and pieces that if we want to dive into, we can. But I think like for the sake of this discussion, high level will be useful, and then we can dive into whatever bits and pieces we want to. But in Isaiah, it says that the Lord himself is going to give a sign. Basically speaks that a virgin is going to conceive, give birth, and give his name Emmanuel. It speaks to Old Testament. All these are Old Testament examples. It speaks to Bethlehem being a small place within Judah. And then it is eventually a ruler of Israel is going to come from you. Also speaks to rejoice, Zion and Jerusalem, your righteous and victorious is going to come in riding on a donkey, a colt. He was despised and rejected, and people turned their backs on him, buried him, unjustly condemned and buried like a criminal. These are all different snippets that are in the Old Testament and speak very clearly to Jesus. There's a couple more here, but basically each of those are listed at different times in the Old Testament. And then I think there's quite a bit of history outside of the Bible that says that Jesus was a real person, that Jesus did exist. There's basically a snippet that essentially there's more evidence of Jesus' existence as a human, arguably, but as a human than there is of several other major historical figures that I don't think we would have a podcast to debate, like whether or not Julius Caesar or a handful of other people existed. Like Jesus existed. He was a man that existed for sure. And then there are other, you have the Bible, but again, outside the Bible, there are a number of historical documents that speak to him having been an influential and disruptive person, creating a religion that people were willing to die for. And a church was born out of him, and that isn't the Bible. The Bible also says this, but there are a number of other historical documents that also say it. Some bits and pieces of that. They don't say that exact phrase, obviously. I hope we're not going to get lost in the semantics and specifics. But to me, all of those things, as far as prophecy goes, are pretty clear. And hard to ignore. So I'm happy to talk more on that when you're ready.
I would just ask why I should take the Bible seriously. Prophecy, you said, because it mentions real places, real people. We know that in even nonfiction writings, a lot of it is based on reality. The Harry Potter books reference places all over Europe, but that doesn't mean that the witches and wizards are flying around on broomsticks. So
I would say to that, Ken, that you're absolutely right. Of course, works of fiction and nonfiction obviously reference real places and people and things like that. The difference in the Bible is a couple things. One is the prophecies, like we talked about. There are over 350 messianic prophecies in the Old Testament, all of which were fulfilled by one man, Jesus.
And you're absolutely positive none of this was like backfilled when any of the Bible was retranslated any of the many times or rewritten from memory? Like I think it was in the early 5th or 6th century. It was, I believe, completely lost and then rewritten from memory. So I would just, how do we know that a lot of this wasn't just backfilled into it in the translations?
Yeah, I understand that, and that's a reasonable thought. What I would say is, and none of us are Bible scholars, Ken, just to put that out there.
Yeah. Not either.
Yeah. No, I'm just being real with you. But what I would say is, if you do some study on the historicity of the Bible and its transmission through time, there's a lot of there's more evidence than not that speaks to the trustworthiness of the current translations we have.
What would you say those are?
Well, one is the secular writings that Pete mentioned that verify events, particularly surrounding Jesus, specifically from the Romans.
You're talking about Pontius Pilate, I'm assuming?
Pilate is mentioned in one of them is Josephus. He was a Roman. There was another one, a Greek, that his name is escaping me at the moment. But there's like 11 secular texts, I think it's 11, from that time period, or from like from the 100 years after Christ was crucified, that speak to the same. They document the events, including the resurrection.
Yeah. I mean, and you can look this up. Pontius Pilate, that's been thoroughly debunked. So,
can you give a source for that?
Sure.
What part of what are you saying about Pontius Pilate has been debunked?
The part about Jesus, it doesn't match with the writing of how it was flowing. It looks as if it was kind of cut and pasted in before by somebody else. So yes, he is a serious scholar, but the question is, was that forged? And I probably should have come. Cambridge University has done a little bit on it.
Is this a writing by Pilate that you're referring to?
Yeah. Just the writing was analyzed by a bunch of linguists and people who study different languages, translations, and they said that the parts about Jesus do not flow with the rest of the story and read as if they were added in at a later time. You can research that more if you'd like, but I know that I've had this debate before. Not debate.
Sure.
But there's a lot of question around the validity or veracity of that.
Sure, and there always will be, right? And they're always, and that's not to discount it. And I certainly will look up what you're talking about. But the amount of prophecy from the Old Testament that was fulfilled, even if a tenth of that was fulfilled by one man, even if the rest of it was false, which we don't believe that it is, but even if it was, any real prophecy, especially separated by hundreds or thousands of years, that then is fulfilled, is a big deal, and it speaks to God's special revelation to us in His Word.
Yeah, and I would just go back to what is your give me your single best prophecy.
Well, I that hasn't changed. It's still Jesus.
Just Jesus existed.
Well, yeah, no, the fact that Jesus, I mean, there are 351 or something of them from the Old Testament. I certainly can't quote many of them, but almost everything about his coming, his birth, his life, his death, and his resurrection was prophesied in the Old Testament. And from the best sources we have, which for us is the Bible, that's true. Those all came true. They were all fulfilled. And so when you ask what my number one prophecy is, I guess I'm giving you a group of prophecies, but prophecies about Jesus. Those, in my opinion, those speak to the Bible being the special revelation of God more than anything else.
Yeah. And again, I think it gets circular there because I go back to why should I believe the Bible then?
Yeah. And I'm glad you said circular because, again, we'll go back to immaterial laws that like I argue as a presuppositionalist, right? And my presupposition is the Bible, is Christianity. And I would argue that you and a lot of other people like you are also presuppositionalists. We just have different sets of presuppositions, right?
Sure.
And so that being the case, I think that I think that you live your life and you kind of borrow from the Christian worldview in the way you live your life. I would assume that you live
we celebrate Christmas. I say Merry Christmas to people. It's my tradition that I grew up with, and
sure, yeah, and I mean things on a kind of a more regular, deeper level. In that you probably conduct yourself in a moral way most of the time, right?
Yeah, and I would say moral. I'm a natural scientist, and I would say most morals and behaviors come from an evolutionary aspect of primate behavior of why are we nice? Why don't we lie? Why don't we steal? Because for hundreds of thousands of years, if you did that and acted like that, you were kicked out of the group. And that was pretty much a death sentence for you at the time. So it behooved the people who could get along in the groups better. They were going to have more children. Then the behaviors are going to get passed on more. Stealing is bad. Hurting people is bad. And it would be, I think, arise out of an evolutionary aspect more so than it's installed into us.
Okay. I hear you. And that's a reasonable argument. But again, I would say that we would say that morality is universal. Would you?
I would agree with you. And I would say it is universal because of our common evolutionary past that we shared going back hundreds of thousands of years. And culture is going to play a part in that now. I mean, it's not going to be a completely overwhelming thing. We know that people behave differently in different cultures. I've been all over the world. I can tell you that.
Sure. So let me ask you about that. People that behave differently or hold to a different moral code in different cultures throughout the world.
Sure.
You know, there are some cultures across the world that it is acceptable in those cultures to do things that we would consider morally reprehensible. Would you agree?
Absolutely. Yeah.
Okay. So we call them morally reprehensible, but those people say that they're okay. So are they good or are they bad?
I would say they're bad.
Okay. So
because again, that behavior, I can take a judgment from my lived experience that I would not want those things to happen to me. So to see it happen to another person, I could also, I think, make a fair assumption they don't want that to happen to them either.
I completely agree with you. I think where we differ is I think that the origin. I think that you know that those things are wrong, and if given the opportunity, you would go stop those things from happening, right?
Absolutely.
Because you know that they're wrong. Which I would also argue speaks to morality being objective and
Yep.
transcendent.
Yep.
So would you agree that morality is transcendent? It transcends humans?
Culture, time periods. Yeah.
Okay. So if morality is transcendent, then it has to have a base in something that transcends nature and physical reality.
Can you give me an example of something that transcends nature or reality so that I can have something to compare that to?
Sure. And I won't use God, right?
Thank you.
I would say God because that's true, but I get it. I would point back to the laws of logic, which we agreed are immaterial and universal. And I would also point to rationality. Rationality is universal. It is, like we talked about. Well,
yeah.
yeah.
I know. I'm just cracking you.
No, I agree with you. We lack it in a lot of places, but rationality, like we talked about science earlier, we have to be rational and reasonable about things in order to move forward and in order to learn things, things like that. So I would say rationality, laws of logic, mathematics, these things are all immaterial, universal, and unchanging.
Yeah.
And therefore have to have an immaterial, universal, unchanging source.
There you go with that word immaterial again.
Well, we already agreed that the immaterial exists.
Okay. But again, I feel like we're filling in the gap. We're not ruling out other things that what did this Sherlock Holmes, when you've ruled out every other possibility, the only one that remains is the answer. I think that's wrong because how do you know every possibility? How can you even, you can't know.
I think something to take in that moment then is, if we can't know every possibility, then we have to make a decision based on the best available information that we are able to collect.
Yep.
So if I can
go ahead, Brendan. No,
nope,
that's all right.
You go. No, you went first.
Is that like the transcendent moral values transferring between us? We just know that it's appropriate for me to keep going.
Yeah, it's right and wrong, man.
You just a dirty heathen.
That is correct. So yeah, if we have to go with the best available information that we have, because I think in the beginning of this conversations that we had back and forth before we got connected, in some of the comments, and things like that, we were talking about physical evidence, but what we were talking about is not a physical thing. There is physical evidence of Jesus as best as can be preserved over a 2,000-year period, where there is the Bible, and then outside of it are the documents and other things we talked about. So, and other historical things that show contextually and culturally that it seems like this is a proper thing, or not a proper thing, but a real thing that happened. So like we have that piece of evidence. We have the prophecy evidence, and even if we take one of these things out, like we still have the other one. There's a couple other things that are escaping me in this moment that I'm happy to try to think of and I'll bring up again, but we have several bits and pieces of evidence that say that this is an explanation, and these things are outside of physical science. So God is outside of physical science. For us to go outside and look and be like, oh, right there, like there he is. There isn't that thing. So we have to depend on other bits and pieces of information to be able to make this proclamation that we are making, that God is in fact real.
And Pete, how would you respond to a Muslim who would say the same about Muhammad and all the prophecy with that? And they like to make a lot of scientific arguments, like the Quran says every life was born of water. So, and we know this, which that's not true, but they make a lot of arguments about prophecy and stuff just the same. So how would you respond to them saying that? Or another question that I ask people is, say say I'm born on a deserted island. I have no idea. I've never even heard the word religion before. I have a Muslim come to me. They say, I have a Quran. I have a book. It has the answers to all of life's greatest mysteries and problems. It's called the Quran. A Jew comes to me and says, I have a book that has the answers to all of life's greatest mysteries and problems. It is called the Torah. Then a Christian comes and says the same. I have a book that has the answers to all life's greatest questions, mysteries, and problems. It's called the Bible. And a Hindu says it's the Bhagavad Gita. How would someone on a desert island who has no experience with any of them, and they're all telling me that, there's prophecy that backs them. They've all had personal experiences with these gods. How would you tell me to go about finding out the closest thing to objective truth in that scenario?
Yeah.
So if I can jump in here, Pete.
Yep.
So good question. And I would say that as far as the Torah, the Bible provides the rest of the Torah, right? It fulfills all those prophecies in the Torah. And, it's for a lot of reasons, some of us believe the rest of the Bible, the New Testament, and we've come to Christ in that. As far as the Quran says that
they are the final, they are the end. This is the last word. Yeah.
Right. But it also speaks to the accuracy of the Bible, right? It speaks to that in Jesus, the Quran. Yep.
And a lot of prophets.
Yep. All the things. I cannot speak to basically anything outside of the three monotheistic religions. I just don't know. But going back to something you said right before that question, you said, when you referenced the Sherlock Holmes quote, you said, we can't know all possibilities, which I would agree with. But I would also say, if we can't know everything, how can you justify knowing anything?
I don't think you can 100%.
Okay. So I see what you're saying, and you're being consistent.
With like math, I would, 2 + 2 = 4. If anyone puts 2 rocks together and 2 more rocks, they're going to have 4 rocks.
Sure. But I would argue also, Ken, that you do know things. You know a lot of things. And right. But you just said you don't think you can really know anything. And so say that again?
Not 100%. No.
Okay. So I would argue with you. I would argue that point with you, because I would say there are things that you do know 100%. You just gave an example. In mathematics, right? You can know that 100% for certain, no question. I would also argue that you know other things. I would argue that you know what is right and wrong. I would argue that you're sitting in that chair right now. I would argue that you know about a lot of things. You're a smart guy. You know a lot. And I would also say that you know those things because you can know things. And the way you can know things is because the triune God of Scripture, as an immaterial, universal, unchanging creator, gave us the ability to have knowledge. Knowledge starts with him, and you are a man made in the image of God.
Yeah, that is your opinion.
It is. I would just ask you to think about
it. As far as not knowing anything 100%, I'm more talking in hypotheticals. I'm not sitting in I'm sitting in a stool. I know that I'm sitting in it. Now,
you got me.
The question is not, is it happening? Can I objectively prove that it is happening? And I think that I can show you that this chair is here, or my stool is here. I can't show you that I know morality, right and wrong. That's more of a metaphysical subject.
Yeah, but I think that you demonstrate in your life every day that you do know about morality. You know about objective morality because that's how you live your life. And I think to do that, you have to, if you're professing to be an atheist, I think you have to borrow from the Christian worldview to live the way you live. You're living like a Christian, but you're professing to be an atheist.
A Hindu would probably say I'm living like a Hindu in the same in regards, and a Buddhist would probably say the same too. So it would just come down to how do we figure out if it's true or not?
Well, I think I think the things we've talked about tonight that we have agreed are true, are real. Things like reason and rationality and uniformity of nature, things like those. The Christian worldview explains all of those things that we've talked about far better than any other theistic worldview. We have
I
a
would say
man. Go ahead.
Hindus got it a lot closer.
How's that?
Their model of the universe is billions of years and not thousands. It just follows a more natural, actual natural progression. I would say.
Yeah. So
I find those religions more convincing, to be honest. And I'm not going to say, like I said, I don't think I can know anything for 100%. And going back to it, how do I know that I'm sitting on a chair? I could just be a brain in a vat somewhere thinking that I'm sitting on a chair. So back to that, I don't think there is 100% knowledge. I think there are weird things that happen that we don't exactly have good explanations for. But I think that's the answer for it, is we don't have a good explanation for it. And so trying to punch one in doesn't work very well. So I've always thought, and maybe you've heard of it, maybe you haven't, the Miracle of the Sun, Miracle of Fatima. And the sheer number of people who claim to have experiences with supernatural things. I think that's pretty, I say it's evidence. I don't think it's the greatest evidence, but I think it's evidence that there is maybe something beyond our perception that we're not very keen to. I'm just not too fast to ascribe it to any one particular thing. My answer would be, why does that stuff happen? I don't know. I think we should find out. That would be my answer. And, and I think that's also, a lot of theists would probably say, an atheist, you're going to think, I think something came from nothing. I don't think that. I don't know where the universe came from. And I think any scientist who says they know exactly how the universe came about, they are not being honest. The Big Bang explains what happened after this happened. Why it happened, that's definitely still up for debate. We're just, the Big Bang model just says this happened, and when it did, this appeared to happen after it. The why, I don't know. Why does evolution happen the way that it does? I mean, there's natural selection.
It's almost like it's by its design.
Almost. But again, I'm not too keen to ascribe that to any. My answer would still be I'm unconvinced of the origin of that. And would keep my mind open to other possibilities. And that would kind of be I don't know if it was any of you guys. I was talking to someone in the comments, and they said, "Well, we're just going to have a discussion, and no one's mind's going to change anything." And I kind of had
Yeah,
to correct them.
that
Well,
wasn't
wait,
us.
if I saw physical evidence, I would become like a celibate monk tomorrow because
I
there
think
was
though,
no reason not to.
I think that what you are asking for though, physical evidence of a fundamentally non-physical thing, like those two things don't align.
But God interacts with the physical world, doesn't he?
And we have evidence of that. We have extensive personal experience that is documented globally for thousands of years. We have the Bible, which is, there are manuscripts that are very old. I don't know the age, but very old manuscripts that show that it is fundamentally unchanged over time. There are also extensive is a dramatic word. There are a significant number, 15, 20, 10, whatever the number is, doesn't matter. There is a number of secular texts that speak to the accuracy and Brendan's word that I don't understand. But the historicity of the Bible.
Yeah,
Almost.
Damn. So we have the best evidence in the physical world that we can have. And some of the personal experiences I think really stand out too. When you talk about people that completely change, and I mean, I guess that could happen maybe for any reason, and that would be the argument against it. But when you look at somebody, excuse me, in the Bible as an example, but like Saul, Paul, there's this guy who is known as being, completely against a particular people, persecuting them, everything, and then has a light switch and changes. And how does that happen? There are other, if it was a person, like, okay, that's an anomaly, but there are stories like that exist everywhere. And I won't get into his testimony; it's his to tell. But and we all are probably examples to some extent. But Drew is a great example of this. Drew, his personal story was going down a path, and then a light switch happens, and he changes and becomes a totally different person. Like that, I think that story at scale becomes evidence.
Yeah, there's also the unlikelihood of the Christian religion persevering throughout, from the time of Jesus's resurrection until today. It was a very, very outnumbered group of guys that all ended up dying badly, like crucifixion and beheading and being boiled in oil for the sake of this testimony. Like, if it was all fake, I don't know that you're going to get people to die for it like that. You're not going to get people to die for it like that over and over and over again to make sure that the story perseveres and is handed down.
We have monks that do it and basically turn themselves into statues and for their religion. And I would point back to the Indian religion again, going back several, 1,000 years would predate Christianity, and those stories still persevere. So does that make those stories even more valuable because they're even older and still around?
I see your point, but what I just said about the story persevering and people dying badly is one piece of this evidence. When you pair that with everything else we've talked about, like you inherently knowing and believing about the immaterial and about the ability to have knowledge and the ability to know what is right and wrong, and those things existing universally and in an unchanging fashion, the Christian worldview wraps all of that up more coherently certainly more coherently than the atheistic worldview. The atheistic worldview collapses on itself into absurdity when you start talking about immaterial things.
I don't know what this worldview you keep talking about is, though.
Just it's your view of the world. It's the lens through which you view reality.
Yeah, like I said, that the atheism doesn't really cross my mind most days. It's not something I think about too much.
Yeah, and I don't mean to lump you in with a group, but
It's not. Go ahead. Go ahead.
No, I just mean the majority of people in my experience that identify themselves as atheists tend to hold to a naturalistic, materialistic worldview, meaning they view reality and the universe in the light of only what we can see and feel and touch is real. And when someone like you will have an honest conversation and be intellectually honest like you've been, then you get down to the fact that the immaterial is real. And we would say that because you're a man made in the image of God is why you know these things.
And I would just disagree and say I'm not convinced by the claims. I think the natural explanation it makes more sense to me. And it's not, I think also a lot of times people make it into a choice of what I'm believing. I can't choose. Like tomorrow I can't just wake up and be like, okay, I believe in God now. I just don't, and I can't force myself to. Again, I haven't found most of the writings that I've researched have gone back to, these are probably forgeries. All the witnesses for Jesus, okay, the claim is there that these witnesses were there, but how do we actually know it? And how do we know these historical documents are accurate when they're gone through? And a lot of them are kind of found to be on shaky ground.
Ken, why do you, just curious your opinion, why do you think that the Bible is the Christian Bible is the most published book?
It's popular.
It is popular. Why do you think that? I think there's been something like 5 billion copies ran. So, but why is it so popular if it's untrue, I guess? If there's that many people across the globe.
Does the amount of people believing in something make it right?
So I think the answer to that is probably no, depending on how you look at it, right? We talked about morality a lot. That's because a lot of people agree that something is right or wrong, right? So that's seems to be what makes it moral and immoral.
Sure.
But I would say that if there's billions and billions of copies of this one book being created, it would lead me to believe that it was more likely than, I don't know, maybe the others. And I'm speaking out of opinion here. I'm not saying anything that I have, factual evidence on or anything like that. But it would lead me to believe that there's something to it. But at the same time, if it doesn't exist, then what is the point of life in general? Just to exist?
I don't know. That's my honest answer. I think you guys would say to live in God's image the best that you can, model that. I would just say I don't know. And I think too many, I would say atheists a lot of times don't make that statement enough that we don't know. We're not claiming to know. We just don't think anyone else knows either. And we'd like to keep digging into that. And I even said, reality is kind of a weird thing, and weird things do happen. I'm just, what that gets attributed to, I think, is where we kind of diverge on that. Where I would say, I don't know.
Is it fair to say that the reason you're saying I don't know is because you're wanting to look at this scientifically, and you don't feel like we have scientific evidence that says this is the right thing, so we don't know that this is the thing yet. Is that why you land where you land? And it's not a gotcha question. I have a book I want to tell you to read. That's why I'm asking.
No,
I want to
check
ask
it
you
out.
to read.
There's kind of a saying in science. It's like, if you give us prove us one miracle, and we'll give you the rest.
Sure.
So yeah.
So Drew actually recommended a book for me that I read about a year ago. It's called Believing is Seeing. If you've already read it, then so be it. But if you haven't, I would recommend it. It's by Michael Guyen. That. So the guy will do it his own justice if you read it. It's on audiobook. I listened to it on Audible. It was super easy. But he is I'm gonna speak about this and I don't understand it, so forgive me, but is essentially like an astrophysicist and then also like a molecular scientist or something close to that. I'm probably butchering it if you are, and I know you have a degree in biology, so you probably are smarter than me on that topic. But two significant sciences that this guy is deep in. He was an atheist and had read most of the religious texts and disproved them scientifically, and then wanted to do the same with the Bible. And the book is essentially, not shocker because I'm talking about it, is a story of him trying to debunk the Bible with the scientific perspective and the scientific method, and then being unable to do so, and ends up becoming a Christian. It's I think you will appreciate it, just the way that
Oh, it's
you clearly
interesting.
think and talk, and you should read it. I think it's like a 10-hour listen on audiobook. I listen at like 1.2, so maybe it's a little bit longer, but it's worth checking out.
No, that sounds interesting. I'll definitely look at that.
Go ahead.
So the last thing I have, and I want to apologize for being late, Ken. We appreciate you being on, and thanks for being here. And mostly listening, but you're familiar with C.S. Lewis, right? I mean, so he said one time, we have three options about Jesus. He's a liar, a lunatic, or our Lord, and that's the choice that we have to make. And I think by the end of our life, we all make that choice one way or another. But what, you believe in supernatural things at all?
I find it interesting. I don't know if believe would be the right word. I think before you got on, I actually mentioned a couple events that I have found really interesting, like the miracle Fatima, the miracle of the sun. That I think that was in Portugal. And I was just talking also about across cultures and across time, how prominent and the population amount of people who have claimed to experience the supernatural is a large number. That I think that's evidence. I don't think it's the best evidence. I think it is evidence. And then Skinwalker Ranch, I think, that's some weird stuff going on there. If you've not heard of that, we'll put you down a rabbit hole. Weeks. So yeah, and I said, and I think I was as honest as I could be, and maybe there is something beyond this reality that we're not aware of. Sometimes it kind of seems like there is. My hope would be, if your God is as loving as you say he is, I hope that when I get there, he understands that my belief wasn't a choice that I made. I just never found anything convincing, but I still lived what I think is a moral life, and what I would even say most Christians would think is the moral life. I'm married, faithful with 2 kids, provide for the family. I'm a really traditional guy. Served in the Army for 6 years, paratrooper.
Yeah, we thank you for that, for sure.
Thank you for your service on that, by the way.
Our God does say that we have free will, and that's unfortunately been our demise. But he also tells us, that it's not our works that get us to him, no matter how good or how bad. And I mean, thank God legitimately for that for me, because I've been a pretty crappy human for a lot of years. But just my part on this that I'll wrap up with is we should be the evidence, right, as Christians, and we do a terrible job of it a lot of times. We're absolutely hypocrites, and but we have that forgiveness from Jesus Christ, and um, I think that the three of us are started out on this mission to hopefully reach other guys and help show that um, it's all right to be broken and not perfect. Um, but for me, I would say it was a bit of a supernatural revelation that got me here, and I hope that happens for you as well.
Can I ask what it was? And if you don't want to share it, if it's too personal, that's totally fine.
No, 100%, man. Do we have time, Brandon?
Yeah,
All right.
let's do it.
Pete, good?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Man, so just like in a nutshell, grew up in a drug home. My dad was an enforcer for a couple of large criminal organizations. He was the one that collected money or other things when people owed. And I grew up following a lot of those footsteps.
I imagine the nicest dad.
Yeah, no, not at all. Not at all.
That's what he's known for.
And coming to adulthood and bad alcoholic, adulterer, you name it, wasn't living the life that I needed to be living. And that's a very short version. But one night, laying in bed, unprovoked, and I've thought about it time and time again, man. I've thought about what happened in the weeks prior, what happened in the months prior. Was there something maybe lingering in my subconscious that, triggered me into this or whatever? But it was like somebody reached through the ceiling and just grabbed me by my guts and pulled me out of bed. Not physically, I got up on my own accord. But man, I immediately felt convicted of every sin I had ever committed. I felt shameful. I felt all those things to a level that I've never felt them before. And in my heart and in my mind, there was no mistaking that it was God convicting me at that time. And I went outside, puked. I mean, it was a deal. Like it lasted a little bit, and from then it's been several years now, and I've lived my life for God, and I mess that up every day as well. But I'm trying. I repent, and try to move forward. And my life is a lot better. But quite honestly, man, my life wasn't that bad then. I was living in my own ignorance, and didn't really know the difference.
Yeah.
But we're at a point now where our life does revolve around Christ. I'm married. I've got kids and everything. Hopefully, a pretty moral guy most of the time. I'm sure I screw that up sometimes. But the difference was accepting Christ as my savior. I don't have all the fancy big words like Brendan does and everything, and Pete's definitely smarter than I am. But I got my testimony, man. I'm sticking to it, and we appreciate the heck out of you, man. And
thank you.
Yeah, hopefully.
Well, thanks for your story too. Thank you.
Oh yeah, man, no problem. And you ever want to talk offline, dude? Hit me up. I would love to. I'd love to continue discussing.
The thing, because I got a story really, really close to yours, man. I got hurt as a paratrooper in the Army and busted my hips and my back up. really bad. And it was back in the time where they just kind of threw pills at you.
Sure.
Yep.
Then I got out of the Army and went to a VA doctor, and he was just like, I'm not comfortable prescribing you any of this. And so that I didn't know how bad the sickness from that could be. That led to a lot of bad choices on my behalf.
Yep.
To kind of like escape that pain that I was in. But yeah, I really messed my life up using drugs, drinking. I used to smoke a pack and a half of cigarettes a day. I still vape, use a little vape. I don't drink any at all anymore, or use drugs. I think the message a lot of guys need to hear, they don't hear it in school, is you have, as an individual, you have value. Whether if that's because you're created in the image of God or otherwise, you have value as an individual. You can do good things. You can be better. And so I don't know really what it was for me one day. I went through a lot of bad. My brother passed away from an overdose. So yeah, drugs really messed my life up for a while, and somehow I got out of that. And I kind of got out of that by just believing that I had value, more so than I did, or the people around me were telling me that I had. So
You absolutely have value. You're so valuable that Jesus Christ gave his life for you. And I think that I don't know a lot about the Quran or Hinduism and all of that, but I don't know that their guys did that for them. I don't know that they died and sacrificed for them the way that.
So I'm intertwined with Buddhist culture because I do quite a bit of Muay Thai. I'm just getting back into it after about a year off because I had a fight, got my jaw broke, and had to get surgery and put that all back together. So I just got back to it last week. But if you ever watch Muay Thai, it's very deeply entrenched in Buddhist culture. They do special dances before the fight to honor all the fighters and coaches and monks and people like that that came before them, is to show the respect. It's called the Waikru Rambui. But they actually are atheists when it comes down to it. They don't. I've talked to some who believe in like some supernatural stuff, of some monks who could do some things that we would call supernatural, and others that would say no, it's life. This is it's more a model for living, more so than having a god at it. It's more of a mindset that you're trying to get to, more than anything. But yeah, there's not much supernatural stuff with it. As far as
that's one of the things, Ken, with the Christian worldview, with our beliefs, is our God, the only God. He loves us so much that, like Drew said, he sent his only son to die sacrificially for us so that we could have eternal life with him. And that's what separates the Christian worldview from the rest of them. Our God literally sacrificed himself for us, and he did the same for you. And man, we just pray that he would speak to you.
Yeah. This could be a stupid question too. If the God is all powerful, why couldn't he just snap his fingers and forgive sin? Why did he have to send himself back and into himself, or give his son and
Yeah.
torture?
So that goes.
It's a good question, man. It's
Yeah.
good.
Yeah.
It's fair.
Yep, it is a good question, and it goes back to what Drew said a few minutes ago about free will. He created man to live in harmony with him, and gave us free will, because without choice you can't have love, right? If he programmed man to only do what he wanted them to, that's not love, that's robots, right? And
So,
so
but did they get that from Adam and Eve eating from the
yep,
tree of knowledge of good and evil?
yep,
And they weren't supposed to do that.
correct. But they had
So,
free will, and they sinned against God by doing what he told them not to do, which is what introduced the sin condition that we all have to
I would
us.
just say maybe don't put a tree and a serpent in the perfect garden, and then that wouldn't happen. But maybe you would say you wanted the temptation to be there. Maybe.
Well,
it's
again,
free will.
yeah, without the chance to without free will, right? That isn't love. That isn't harmony. And you have to choose to love someone, right? Like you love your wife, and you choose to love your wife, and she chooses to love you, right? And but you didn't have to choose that, and you can choose to do right and choose to do wrong, right? And that's what creates real love, is when you choose to do the right thing, and you choose to be in love with someone, and live in harmony with them. And so that's what God gave man, because he created us to live in harmony with him. He had to, that free will is necessary to have a truly loving relationship. And we jacked it up because we have that free will, and we're fallen humans.
And for it to truly be free will, there has to be negative consequences. My children think they have free will, and they don't, because I create borders and guidelines for them, right? Like I'm like, oh, you can pick, you can pick the red pajamas or the black pajamas, but you're wearing freaking pajamas. Whereas it's not really free will, right? But so to make the argument that like, oh, well, there just couldn't be bad things in the garden, and then it wouldn't be bad and this wouldn't happen, that's not actually free will.
Yeah. I it's just, and that's where I try to stop looking at it literally, and I tried to pull out the metaphorical values of it that I kind of spoke on earlier, because otherwise I just sit there and logically pick it apart. Okay, well, if God didn't want them to do that, maybe isolate them and create another breeding pair that doesn't, and instead of letting Adam and Eve and that whole disaster run until you have to flood the earth and wipe us out to restart it again. So yeah, that's and that's why I try to stop logically looking at it, and I tried to look at the metaphorical values behind the stories.
I definitely think it's important to know who God is. He is a righteous God, and there had to be judgment, and the whole thing of it is that it's for His glory, right? And we get into a whole nother podcast on all of this, but yeah, man, I think you've got some good questions, and I think we should continue chasing them down.
Yeah, I would strongly recommend. You talk a lot about like using logic, using science, etc. You should read that book, because I needed that. I feel the same way. I have felt the same way. I'm like, man, this whole thing could be made up. Like it feels like it could be. And it was very helpful for me, because I was like, no, I'm too smart. Like I know, I understand logic, I understand science. Like how do you explain any particular of the points, right? And that book was very helpful for me to hear someone who is way smarter than me, way smarter scientist, way smarter with logic and everything else, explain from that perspective how he picked apart each one of these things, I don't know. I strongly recommend it. And one other thing that I feel convicted to say to you is that um, maybe for one, maybe we're wrong. I mean that could be, that reality could exist. I don't think that it does. I don't think that any of the three of us think that it does. But I mean, fine, that could be the case. If we're not wrong, I want you to know this. You said that you hope when you get to, the end of your life that you're like, oh, well, God will be like, hey, man, I lived a pretty good life. I did these things. Like, hopefully he's like, cool, sorry you were a little confused. It's all good. And the Bible's pretty clear about what you need to do to get into heaven, and that is to um, accept, trust, and believe in Jesus Christ. And you guys, the other two guys, can be more articulate on this probably than me, but I just want to I wanted to say out loud to you that, like, don't get that far and then stop and be like, I'm probably good, because you're not. So you should pursue it further and decide one way or the other, would be my, like, strong recommendation to you, as a brother on this earth, regardless of our faiths.
Yeah, yeah. And I don't. The issues I take with the Bible is I find some of the contradictions in it, like who's Joseph's father? Matthew 1:16, Jacob, the father of Joseph, the husband of Mary. But then in Luke 3:23, Jesus, when he began his ministry, was about 30 years of age, being the son of Joseph, or the son of Heli. And so I find the contradictions in it a little bit. And then there's so many different sects and versions. King James Version, New International, what's English Standard
ESV.
Version.
Yep.
Yeah.
This is a broken world, and
New
humans.
Living Translation, I think.
Correct.
Yeah.
There's hundreds of them.
And so I would say, if there's a God and he wants me to know him so bad, like, give it to me straight a little bit more. Why I feel like I've been digging and digging and digging at this for a long time, and I feel like I've sincerely asked for my revelations when I was at the absolute bottom, and I didn't get them. I just kind of suffered, and like I said, I had to hear other people tell me that I had value just being an individual, and that was like totally a new concept to me that just woke me up and was like, I do control the decisions that I make. And so I try to just be, every day. I think it's a good thing to meditate on, or you could even pray on it. Every night I ask myself, what have I done that's made me a better person, more complete person than the day before? And I try to answer that question every night.
Yeah, and that's awesome. I think we would just encourage you to. I know you said you asked for your revelation, and I would encourage you to continue asking, right? Because we can't know his timing, but he has timing for you. And you've said a lot of things tonight, and you've been super honest, and it's been a great conversation. And a lot of the things you said really speak to that the fact that you are a man made in the image of God, and he loves you, and he sent his son to die for you. And I would say just soften your heart, be open to it, and keep asking. And we've been going at it now for almost an hour and a half. I think we're going to wrap it for tonight.
It was good stuff, though.
Oh yeah, it was great, dude, man.
Agreed.
It was great. And we sincerely appreciate you coming on here, Ken. It's been a great conversation. You're an honest dude. You're a smart dude. Really, really appreciate you coming on here.
I appreciate you having me on and following through on that and actually doing it.
Sorry it took so long. Turns out, like we said earlier, we kind of suck at tech. We couldn't get our website. We thought we had the contact form on there, and it was just going into oblivion. Took us a while to figure that out.
We figured it out, and like I said, it got off to a rocky start, but some things do, and like I said, I think we wrapped it up good. So it was a pleasure talking to you guys. I appreciate you giving me the time. Wish you guys all the best, and maybe we'll, I'm always here if you want to kick me a message or have me back on for any reason. You got my email and my contact info. So
yeah, man.
my pleasure.
Yeah, absolutely, Ken.
All right. Well, that is going to be a wrap for tonight. Everybody, this has been Ken. Ken, thank you very much, and we will talk soon.
Adios.
Adios.